Yeah.
I'm not sure that's selfish, right?
Yeah, it's not. But then compared to what you said,
No, I don't think so. I don't
I'm
think
just
so because
kidding.
it's
I'm mostly just like, kidding, but yeah.
okay. Okay, good. Sorry, taking it very seriously. Yeah. No, because no, but because I think it's very, whatever calls to that work. That's maybe what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
trying to say. Is
yeah.
whatever is
Mm.
calling to, hey, we notice the importance of this in the world, and
Yeah.
we're idealistic enough to be willing to spend part of our lives
Yes,
on it, right? Being
absolutely.
ridiculized because, ridiculed because, oh, empathy, ha ha ha, or not. Others say, "Oh, wow, you do
Yeah.
that. That's so important." And
Yeah.
yeah, you want to know more about it? No, thanks. Okay.
Do you want to
It's
pay for
true.
it? Not
Yeah.
at all.
No, thanks. Yeah. What we're doing is we're saying empathy is inherently good,
Yeah.
right? And as you know, I always say, I don't believe that's true, that empathy is
Yeah.
inherently good. I think that empathy is inherently neutral. And it's really about what are
Mm.
you using it for
Yeah.
that is determining whether it's good or bad,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So it's interesting that on the one hand you say, "Oh, you're called to it, and it's connected to your spirituality, and it's connecting, and I'm a messenger, and yup, 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 yup." And on the other
Mm.
hand, yeah, but wait a moment, it can also really be
Yeah.
used for very, very miserable outcomes,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
hurt others,
Mm.
to manipulate others, to empathy is also that. And I think that's where I understand that there's this backlash towards,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
the problem with empathy is that people often, it feels like we're preaching,
Mm.
right? It's almost like we're preaching. And I think it's very important to realize the skillful part of it. And that's why, I see it as, yeah, but there's so many examples of how you can use
Yeah.
empathy to manipulate that it's really not inherently good. We can't say it's inherently good. So I'm not preaching for empathy.
Mm.
There's something more to empathy that is even more important, maybe. If you want to use empathy, you also need to have an intention, right? And you need
Mm.
to be
Yeah.
aware of that intention. And
Mm.
if you want to use it for good, then you need to be very clear about that intention because it can really harm.
You just
Right?
reminded me of that story. Sigmund Freud, his nephew, I think his
Mm-hmm.
name was Edward Bernays, and how
Yeah.
this person was hired. He's basically Sigmund Freud's nephew, so you can imagine what sort of a genius he is. And then he was so good with public relations and this sort of like work that he was hired by the American Tobacco Company in order to, for one of their campaigns. And the campaign basically was to get women to smoke, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you had
Mm-hmm.
this entire population in America, like women
Mm-hmm.
who weren't
Mm-hmm.
smoking. So, they hired Edward Bernays to figure a way out to get these women to smoke. And he so beautifully used empathy.
Oh,
To inspire
interesting.
women.
Yeah.
So what he did is during some parade or a carnival or something of that sort, he had some women, who were dressed very fashionably, holding, lighted cigarettes,
Mm-hmm.
and then a couple of photographs and whatnot were taken of these women standing
Mm-hmm.
so happily and so fashionably, with cigarettes in their hands, and they called it torches of freedom. Look at how brilliant that is. I mean, that
Uh-huh.
was a time when women were looking to kind of, or freedom was something that they were like
Yeah.
aspiring to have. And
Yeah.
and this campaign became such a huge success that women
Yeah.
across America then did start smoking, right? And so this
Yeah.
is a very, very beautiful example of how empathy definitely can be used in our.
Yeah. So can you pinpoint then to me
Mm.
what is the empathy in there? How do you see it be an
Because,
effective empathy?
yeah, because Edward Bernays was so able to understand
Yeah.
that women at that point in time, one of
Yeah.
the things that is, so he was able to put aside his man, uh, mind and
Good.
really
Yeah.
think, yeah, think from the perspective of a woman. What
Yeah.
they need right now is freedom. What they are
Yeah.
aspiring to have is freedom. What they are looking
Yeah.
for is that. And so just having that sort of empathy for women
Yeah.
is exactly what kind of enabled him to create a campaign of that sort that women
Yeah.
so connected with, right? And I think
Yeah.
advertising across the world every other day use this, you know, for their own benefit. And again, another example is serial killers and all these sort of stuff, which we hear a lot about, right? About how they're so able to empathize with their victims that it's just easier for them to kind of lure them and, you know, hurt them and all of that. So yeah, I completely agree. Like, you know, and this is a point that I think we need to be speaking a lot more about how empathy is not a virtue that we are preaching, but it's more,
exactly,
you know,
and also, so you know, that's something else that I always feel reluctant to talk about, is that there's also a world out there of the people that call themselves empaths. So the empaths, so people who feel that they walk into a room and they feel the atmosphere of the room, right? They feel, ooh, there's this going on in this team, or there's, you know, or they see another person suffering and they completely feel the suffering of the other person. And so they're highly sensitive. They identify as empaths, right? Naturally tuning into the suffering of others. And so, but very often related to suffering. That's something that I noticed. Like it's that I hardly see empaths, maybe because it's not coming up in my timelines. We're all just steered by artificial intelligence nowadays in terms of what we see of the world. But you know, that it's very often related to suffering. And there's always this overwhelm, like, oh, how to protect yourself as an empath, how to, you know, that's because we naturally empathize with everyone. And I think it's such a misunderstanding there about the skill of empathy and what people experience who identify as empaths, right? And so what happens often, I think, with empaths is that there is a huge emotional contagion happening between them and the other person, right? So if I see you crying, I see your sadness and I feel it deep inside me, that's an emotional contagion. That's your sadness occupying my space, right? My being. There again, we come to that distancing about self-other distinction, which is so important in empathy. Absolutely. Is in both in the bias and not projecting yourself on the other person, but also in what you see of the other person, right? And not projecting it on you, not becoming their suffering, not becoming their anger or their, exactly, And so I think that empaths are not necessarily skilled in empathy. I think there's a big difference between empathizing, so the skill of practicing empathy, and being able to pick up on moods or emotions or you know, things that are happening around you and becoming overwhelmed by it. So especially for empaths, I think what empaths need is empathy practice.
I agree. The number of times I've heard people, like, you know, some that I connect to on a, you know, maybe as part of my work, I've seen so many people tell me like I'm an empath. It's like a tag that they carry, you know, and that always confuses me because what you're speaking about. And so I remember like asking one particular woman who was telling me about how she's an empath, and the moment she, like, you know, she connects with or meets somebody, she can just like read exactly what they are feeling, and kind of, you know, it just, and she completely immerses in it. And I was telling her that's not empathy. That has nothing to do with empathy, because we struggle so much to to define empathy in the right way and teach people and like let them know what empathy actually is. And I'm like, no, that's not empathy. That really is emotional contagion. That's sensitivity.
I also wonder to what extent empaths question their intuition, right? Because it can also be a projection. Absolutely. It can also be all coming out of you and not at all. So somebody might be slightly sad and you might just explode this emotional thing on it, right? And I think it's very important when you are sensitive to this, because I do think that some people are more sensitive to moods
Yeah.
and emotions of others than others, right? Some people are really touched by it. And so they have personal work to do. What is
Yeah.
it in you that is being touched? Right? And how do you work with that? How do you handle that? And
Yeah.
how do you prevent that from becoming the centerpiece in your room?
Mm.
And turning something that is a natural connection into something that becomes some sort of a self-obsession.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
I feel that, and it's so hard and it's so heavy. Yeah, I think it's really
Yeah.
complicated.
And the fact of the matter very well might be that the other person, might not be feeling that bad at all. Maybe they're
Yeah,
just going through some slight, you know,
exactly. Yeah,
difficulty, and that's it for them. But the
yeah,
empath is the one, like the so-called empath. I don't even like to use that word a lot, but they are probably the ones who are kind of, absorbing all that energy. And yeah, like you rightly said, I think it's all about doing that personal work. I think
yeah,
everything around empathy, like, I think everything, it all comes back to doing personal work,
yeah,
just knowing yourself better, and
yeah,
working with yourself better. And that's the only way we're going to empathize productively
yeah.
and positively and in the right way. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because there in that moment,
Mm.
the empath who is sensing
Mm.
that misery in the other person,
Mm.
to what extent are you able in that moment, the
Mm.
self-empathy, to
Mm.
be aware of, I am sensing this
Mm.
and I need to figure out where it is coming from,
Exactly.
right? Because just assuming because you came into the room in a fine mood, you saw the other person and you became sad, so it must come from the other person.
Mm. Mm.
I'm not sure that's true, right? That person can have triggered something in you that
Yeah.
created that sadness. That is still your sadness, not their sadness.
Exactly.
And in my practice, when I work with empathy practice with people who identify as empaths,
Mm.
I find that there's very often a very quick judgment happening, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I think really there is something about that first step of self-empathy, that doing that work of
Yeah.
opening yourself up to the experience of the other, not to your perception of the experience of the other in that moment. Just try and take a bit of you out of that
Mm.
equation. Just
Yeah.
that's what I said, a bit less about me, and a bit
Yeah.
more about us.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
I'm so glad we touched
But
upon this. Yeah.
yeah, but it's also something, I do also want to recognize that people who identify as empaths
Mm.
often really suffer.
Yeah, they do.
There's a lot of suffering in this world, and so in people who have that feeling, and so I
I
hope
think it
that
comes from a space of having like maybe a past where you've been hurt, you've gone through a lot of trauma, and
mm,
you're carrying a lot of load within you, and that's when people are so-called empaths tend to
mm,
get triggered a lot.
mm,
And it is
mm,
a very, very difficult situation to be in. I know
mm,
somebody like that, and I know how hard she has it on certain days, especially, the
mm,
slightest of
mm,
things just break their heart. And it's hard
mm,
for us to watch the sort of,
mm,
pain that they go through. But somewhere there is also, just by using a label like an empath, you're kind
mm,
of limiting what it is, and you're just
yeah,
putting that whole experience in a certain bucket, and
yeah,
like again, the black and white thing,
yeah,
instead of
yeah,
looking at it as,
yeah,
each individual might be experiencing it differently, and there are, like, other ways of looking at it. But no, just by
yeah.
calling yourself an empath, you're kind of associating
Us and
yourself with,
them.
yeah,
Yeah,
something like a
yeah,
disease, or like, some sort of
yeah,
a problem, like,
yeah.
and I think, which is why even that word and that usage in general is, I think, a problem.
Yeah, but this is very well known. We are social animals, we
Yeah.
human beings. And
Mm.
so we need to be part of groups.
Yeah.
And so empaths choose to identify with the empath group, right?
Mm.
Just like we can identify with race, or we
Mm.
can identify with nationality, or we
Mm.
can identify with family or
Mm.
tribe.
Mm.
It's all part of our
Mm.
tribal nature, really, to
Yeah.
to identify. But you're completely right that all these identifications are diminishing the way we see the world, right? And that's, I love that you say that, because that's what empathy practice is about.
Exactly.
Is just to open
Yeah.
up. There's
Break
more to
down that
see.
barriers. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so also the everlasting exploring, right? Not to take an answer for, yes, that's the way it must be, but to always keep questioning the answer as well, and to just keep on. And that's really what I find, that when I say in the beginning, you know, the development of empathy as a concept and as a practice, you know, and why am I doing this in my life, is that I also find it a real privilege to be able to always remind myself again of, don't get fixed,
Yeah.
don't believe,
Yeah.
don't think this is the way it is.
Mm.
There's so many other ways of seeing things. There's so many other ways. The way things are is really created between us, right? It's really what we create together that is creating our reality. And so we can always explore further. We can always, and there where I get very stuck in my life, personal life, you know, we all get stuck at some point. For me, that's also always the way out. That my thinking of, wait, how can my empathy practice help me to unstuck myself in this personal issue that I'm having at the moment, right? And then it's this reminder of explore. You're stuck because there are beliefs that are really stuck, right? Because you're seeing things in a stuck type of way. And so what is so stuck? What is it that I'm really believing that makes me struggle so much at the moment? And then, is there a way to open it up? And I think that's when, you know, we talk always about empathic creativity. That's what empathic creativity also really is about. It's like empathy pushes for creativity, right? Empathy, because it opens and it opens and it opens. So it creates, it's a generative regeneration, no, generation, a generative force. You know, it's creating new ways of seeing, new ways of experiencing. Yeah, it's a joy to work with, hey?
Absolutely. For me personally, it gives me a lot of courage, you know, because
Yeah,
things
yeah.
that I probably wouldn't have changed or questioned or, you know, looked at differently, empathy pushes me to kind of, you know, have the courage to kind of do that, right? Otherwise, I
Yeah,
would, yeah. So I think that's so true. It really does
yeah,
push your boundaries and push you to kind of be more curious and
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
always question yourself as to
yeah,
okay, and not be fixed on anything.
yeah,
But
yeah,
then that being said, I also think there are certain values or certain uh, yeah, especially value systems that are very core, which
yeah.
I
To your
usually,
being.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
thankfully, but despite that, you know, be it even my own faith, like I always do, like still question and still research on, you know, some of the things that, you know, it's probably my empathy muscle that kind of helps me do that. Because otherwise, if I'm stuck with one way of thinking or one particular faith, I think I would just like sit there with that faith. But what I've always done is question that as well, like, you know, my own faith, and, you know, is that really, and thankfully so far I've always found things that kind of affirm that I'm on the right sort of track. But I don't know, like, but yeah, being open to any possibility is a huge part of. But
Yeah,
I feel it's still
yeah. It's
I think it's all about balance. I think balance is the key word. I mean, you know, so somewhere you need to have a balance even when it comes to these sort of things, because you cannot really function if you do not have any set value systems or, you know,
yeah,
beliefs in place.
but
But that being said, yeah,
absolutely.
you also need
No, but I don't think that you need to.
mm,
So when you're stuck and you're
mm,
having a personal problem with being stuck, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
need to unstuck yourself, then
yeah,
this is a way of doing it. But
mm,
I do think, and we also know, and especially when we see aging people, we're
mm,
becoming more and more rigid. We're becoming more, and we're also, I think, even just with aging, even in adulthood, so not
mm.
in old age, but in
Okay.
adulthood, at some point you've lived this thing again and again and again, and
Yeah.
you've looked at it from many different, and this is just the way it
Mm.
is for you, and that's how it is, and people just have to put up with it. Like, I'm a blonde, almost a bit darker now, European woman, and I can't do anything about it, and that's just the way it is, and I hope that you can accept me as that, and that's it. Or I believe in the power of empathy, and that's just the way it is, and I'm not. But you can hold that personal conviction and open up to other
Yeah.
ways of seeing it. And I think that's what this is about. It's not about empathy, doesn't mean that this opening up needs to change you or your way of being or your convictions all the time. It can, it has the potential, but it doesn't have to, right? That's not the point. The point is more a point maybe of tolerance, of being able to see that your point of view, while very nicely your point of view, is only that, your point of view. And so the other points of view have just the same right of existence in this world as your point of view. And then taking that to the extreme, people then start talking about, yeah, but wait a moment, this is way too tolerant. What about pedophiles? Or what about, do they? And that's where I also struggle, because yes, in a way, it's not about judging what is right and what is wrong in the world. It's about acknowledging that there is all of this in the world, right? And being able to see that and to hold a space for it. And holding a space doesn't mean that everything has the same right of existence or is okay, or we just have to live with it because it's there, and who am I? That's we still have a social contract, and there's all sorts of other processes taking place that regularize our way of being together, right? That the norms and the values and within the societies that shape our way of being together. But that doesn't mean that you can't try and open up to the perspective, even if it's a very extreme, from your point of view, a very extreme perspective that is really something that you really do not want to be associated with. Those are the perspectives that if you open up to it, you might find ways of regulating it. You might find ways of, what is behind that? What is the need that is expressed, for instance, through pedophilia? What is the need that is there? And is there a way of helping people to satisfy this need without abusing children? To help, to find ways to acknowledge that it exists, instead of just coming in, judge it, say it shouldn't be there, and that's it, and you go and deal with it. It's like, just put your judgment aside. It's like, just put it aside. That's not how it is. It is a way of being for these people. So we'll have to find a way to handle it, right? And empathizing has a role there, I think, really.
Absolutely. And especially with these sort of extreme situations, one thing that has always helped, at least me on a personal note, is, like just knowing that I never got to choose the genetics that I have. I never got to choose where I was born, who I was born to, the sort of, childhood that I received. And had I been in the place of, a person that I kind of really, do not agree with, would I have been, how different would I be? I mean, it all always goes back to that basic free will versus, a determinism sort of a discussion. But all that being said, I do feel like, we do have like a responsibility and the ability to kind of make more, better choices in life. And we do have, I personally believe we do have free will, like, but to a certain extent, because certain things are just not in our control. Like I could very well have been born in a very difficult neighborhood with a lot of crime, with a lot of abuse and all of these things. And, and I could have turned out to be a pedophile, or maybe a murderer for that matter. And I'm just, so again, like, going back to, just being grateful for the fact that, you are who you are. And so sometimes even when people hurt us a lot, one good way of looking at it is, thank God I got hurt and I was not the one who hurt the other person, right? I mean, just
Mm.
knowing, just being grateful for being on this side of the instance and not on the other side, right? And yeah, and just that helplessness that we have in a lot of these situations. How lucky are we that we are who we are and not the person that we just look at with so much hatred, because they have committed a crime or whatever, right? And so that has always helped kind of ground myself a little bit more, and just be, yeah. I mean, it's privilege at the end of the day. I didn't build this. I didn't build whatever I have. Even the empathy that I speak about in practice or anything, it was just at some level, some of it was given to me.
Yeah, that's funny. That's what I said about the messenger. It's really that
Exactly.
experience of, I'm not owning this. I'm not making this. I'm not. I have the privilege of being able to practice, to try and live this practice, right? And I feel the benefits of it. That's also something to really acknowledge, I think, is that it's benefiting us really, really deeply. Like, I have a personal peace of mind, when I'm on my own and I'm in nature, or I'm just sitting. I have a peace of mind, really. And having a peace of mind, I mean, we so often don't have peace of mind, right? We're so hustled and bustled by the world, and there's so much happening. And I really feel that this practicing, working with empathy, is part of the creation of that peace of mind, is part of that. And I wanted to say that I love this conversation. We had a lovely conversation.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.